You might have seen the clip circulating on every news feed and social media timeline this morning. It is the kind of moment that political commentators live for, a flash of high drama where the usually dull machinery of governance suddenly looks like a reality television finale. You see a document, a deal that was supposed to secure funding and stabilize policy, being physically torn apart on the Senate floor. The cameras flash, the pundits scream about humiliation, and the internet fills with captions declaring that one political era is over and another has begun. But while the world is fixated on the theater of the moment, on the anger in the West Wing and the shouts of "You are done, sir," they are missing the far more significant story happening underneath the surface. This is not just about a bruised ego or a collapsed negotiation. This is a fundamental fracture in the economic architecture of the government, and it signals a shift in power that is going to ripple directly into your bank account, your workplace, and the broader economy. We are going to walk through this not as a political soap opera, but as a case study in how institutional power actually works when the guardrails of fiscal policy are tested. What you witnessed was not just a rejection of a bill, it was the legislative branch reasserting its absolute authority over the purse strings, a power that has been slowly eroding but has now snapped back with violent force. To understand why this matters to you, we have to look past the torn paper and ask what was actually written on it. That document represented a specific vision of fiscal policy, a trade-off between government spending, debt management, and the promises made to the American electorate. When that deal was destroyed, it did not just hurt the president's feelings. It shattered the certainty that markets and businesses rely on to plan for the future. You might be thinking that this is just Washington noise, that the squabbles of wealthy politicians in suits have nothing to do with the price of groceries or the interest rate on your car loan. But that is exactly where the danger lies. When the executive branch loses the ability to negotiate a budget, when the president is effectively locked out of the room where the money is allocated, we enter a period of profound instability. The markets hate uncertainty more than they hate bad news. If the people holding the debt of the United States believe that the government is paralyzed, that the person in the Oval Office cannot deliver on his promises because the Senate has decided he is irrelevant, the risk premium on everything goes up. That means higher borrowing costs for the government, which eventually translates to higher borrowing costs for you. Let us step back and analyze how we arrived at this breaking point. For years, we have seen a gradual centralization of economic power in the executive branch. We have grown used to the idea that the president is the economy in chief, the person who sets the price of gas, creates jobs, and manages the stock market by tweeting. This is a convenient fiction. In reality, the structure of American capitalism is built on a very specific division of labor. The president proposes, but Congress disposes. The power to tax and the power to spend reside on Capitol Hill, not in the White House. What happened on that Senate floor was a brutal reminder of this constitutional reality. The Senate leader was not just performing for the cameras, he was signaling to the bond markets, to the Federal Reserve, and to the global financial system that the terms of the deal have changed. The leverage has shifted. The president thought he could dictate the terms of economic engagement based on personal influence and populist support. But the Senate operates on the cold logic of votes, procedure, and institutional memory. By tearing up that deal, the leadership was stating clearly that the era of executive unilateralism in fiscal policy is over. This matters to your daily life because the government is the largest economic actor in the world. When its leadership is in open warfare, the flow of capital slows down. Think about the contracts that support infrastructure projects in your state. Think about the federal subsidies that keep agricultural prices stable or the grants that fund research at your local university. All of those things depend on a functioning budget process. When that process breaks down and turns into a spectacle of destruction, the money stops moving. We are seeing leaked reports of secret meetings to bypass the president on future budget deals. This is extraordinary. It suggests that the legislative branch is preparing to govern as a parliamentary system, effectively ignoring the head of state to keep the lights on. For an investor, this is a nightmare of ambiguity. Who do you listen to? Who actually has the authority to sign the check? If you are saving for retirement, you need to understand that this political chaos introduces a volatility tax on your portfolio. The safe, boring predictability that allows compounded interest to work its magic is being replaced by erratic shocks driven by a power struggle that has no clear end in sight. We need to talk about the concept of leverage, because that is what the president thought he had, and that is what he just lost. In any negotiation, leverage is a function of your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. The president believed that the Senate needed him more than he needed them. He thought that his base, his public support, gave him the power to force a deal through sheer force of personality, but the Senate leader called his bluff. By destroying the document, he revealed that the Senate has a different alternative. They can simply wait him out. They can grind the legislative gears to a halt. They can pass stopgap measures that keep the government running on fumes while denying the administration any new policy wins. This is a form of economic siege warfare, and just like in a medieval siege, it is the civilians inside the walls who suffer the most. In this analogy, you are the civilian. When the government cannot pass a budget, agencies cannot hire. Regulations that protect your workplace safety or your clean water get stalled. Small businesses waiting for loans backed by the Small Business Administration are left in limbo. The machinery of the state does not just stop, it begins to rust. It is also crucial to strip away the emotion from the phrase, "You are done, sir." It sounds like a personal insult, and perhaps it was intended that way. But economically, it is a diagnosis. It means that the political capital required to move legislation has been depleted. Political capital is a lot like actual capital. You earn it by winning elections and delivering results, and you spend it to get difficult things done. The president has been spending his capital at a burn rate that would bankrupt a tech startup. He spent it on fights that had no strategic value. He spent it on rhetoric that alienated the very partners he needed to pass this deal. Now the account is overdrawn. The Senate leader is essentially the bank manager cutting up the credit card. This is a moment of foreclosure on the president's legislative agenda. And when a president can no longer legislate, he can no longer manage the economy in any meaningful way. He is left with executive orders, which are fragile and easily overturned by the courts, and the bully pulpit, which is only as loud as the media allows it to be. We are going to go deeper into the mechanics of what happens next, but I want you to sit with the gravity of this shift. You are watching a real-time stress test of the American system. The friction you see is not a bug. It is a feature designed by the founders to prevent tyranny. But that friction generates heat, and right now, the engine is overheating. We have to ask ourselves who benefits from this paralysis. It is certainly not the worker living paycheck to paycheck who needs a stable economy to plan for next month's rent. It is not the small business owner who needs to know what the tax code will look like next year. The beneficiaries are those who thrive on volatility, the short sellers and the crisis managers. For the rest of us, this is a moment to be incredibly vigilant. We need to look past the headline of humiliation and understand the mechanics of the stalemate. Because while they are fighting over power in Washington, the decisions about your economic future are being made in back rooms where you do not have a seat at the table. We are going to expose those decisions. We are going to look at the timeline the Senate is preparing, and we are going to map out exactly how this bypass operation is supposed to work. Because if the president is truly done, the question becomes, who is actually in charge? To answer that, we have to dissect the actual machinery of the deal that was destroyed. This was not just a generic spending bill. It was what we in the economic world call a structural pivot. The president's proposal, the one that ended up in shreds on the floor, was designed to bypass the traditional appropriations committees. It was a direct injection of executive authority into the federal ledger, attempting to move funds from established agency budgets, money designated for things like education grants, highway maintenance, and veterans benefits, into a discretionary fund controlled directly by the White House. He called it an efficiency measure. The Senate called it a violation of Article 1 of the Constitution. When the Senate leader tore up that document, he was not just rejecting a policy, he was protecting the franchise of the legislature. He was sending a message to the donor class and the institutional investors that the checks and balances are still functioning, even if they have to be enforced with public theatrics. But let us get specific about what this means for you. You might hear appropriations process and tune out, thinking it is just bureaucratic jargon. Do not make that mistake. The appropriations process is the transmission belt that turns your tax dollars into the services you rely on. When the president tried to seize control of that belt, he was effectively trying to rewrite the contract between you and the state. If that deal had gone through, the predictability of government funding would have vanished. A sudden tweet or a mood swing in the Oval Office could have frozen funding for your local hospital or halted the construction of the bridge you drive over to get to work. By rejecting it, the Senate restored a level of boredom to the process. And in economics, boredom is a virtue. It means that the bond markets can lend money to the government without demanding a risk premium for political insanity. It means your mortgage rates are determined by inflation and growth, not by the whims of a single man in a dining room. Now consider the leaked reports of secret meetings. This is where the story shifts from a public brawl to a silent coup. The prompt mentions that the master dealmaker is being shut out. This is a reference to the emergence of what we might call a shadow budget. The leadership of both parties in the Senate, people who usually agree on nothing, are reportedly convening to draft a continuing resolution that completely ignores the White House's requests. This is the bypass mechanism. They are using their constitutional authority to originate spending bills to create a fait accompli. They will pass a budget that keeps the government open, funds the military, and services the debt, but it will contain $0 for the president's pet projects. They are betting that he will not dare to veto it and cause a government shutdown because a shutdown would be political suicide given his current weakness. They are cornering him. This is a classic example of institutional antibodies attacking an infection. The system is designed to reject a leader who tries to centralize too much power, but the cost of this immune response is high. While the Senate is busy constructing this bypass, other critical legislative work is paralyzed. We are seeing a freeze on appointments to the Federal Reserve and regulatory agencies. This matters because these are the people who oversee the banking system. If you have money in a savings account or a 401k, you rely on these regulators to ensure that the banks are not taking excessive risks. With the confirmation process held hostage by this war between the branches, the watchdogs are understaffed. We are entering a period of regulatory drift where the rules of the road are unclear, and bad actors in the financial sector often take advantage of that confusion to exploit consumers. Let us walk through the incentives here. Why would the Senate leader, a member of the president's own party in many scenarios, or at least someone who has to work with him, choose the nuclear option? The answer lies in the donor class. The big institutional capital, the people who fund the campaigns and buy the treasury bonds, have likely signaled that they have had enough of the volatility. They want stability. They want to know that the tax code is not going to change overnight. They likely gave the green light for this public humiliation. It is a reminder that in American capitalism, political power is often a lagging indicator of economic power. The president thought he had the base, but the Senate has the boardrooms. And when push came to shove, the Senate leader sided with the capital markets over the populist energy. This is a cold calculation. It sacrifices the unity of the party to save the stability of the currency and the credit rating. For the average worker, this power struggle creates a strange paradox. On one hand, the Senate reasserting control prevents the president from doing reckless things that could crash the economy. On the other hand, a paralyzed government cannot respond to new crises. If we have a sudden supply chain shock next month, or if unemployment starts to tick up, we need a government that can act quickly to pass stimulus or support. We do not have that right now. We have a government locked in a cage match. This means that if the economy takes a turn for the worse, the safety net might not deploy as fast as it should. You need to be prepared for that. This is the time to build your own liquidity, to pay down high interest debt, and to not count on a federal bailout if things get rocky. The government is currently too busy fighting itself to fight for you. We also need to analyze the phrase, "you are done, sir," through the lens of political economy. In Washington, power is perception. As long as people believe you have power, you do. The moment that belief evaporates, the power vanishes instantly. It is like a bank run. The president has suffered a run on his political capital. The "you are done" was the moment the bank closed its doors. Now, every agency head, every general, every bureaucrat knows that the president is a lame duck. They will stop returning his calls. They will slow walk his orders. They will start looking to the Senate for guidance. This is the deep state, not as a conspiracy, but as a bureaucracy protecting itself from a failing executive. It means that for the remainder of this term, the actual governance of the United States will be run on autopilot, guided by career civil servants and legislative aides, while the president is left to rage in the private dining room. This shift has profound implications for global trade as well. The president built his reputation on tariffs and trade wars, but trade policy authority is delegated by Congress. If the Senate decides to reclaim that authority as part of this power grab, we could see a sudden de-escalation of trade tensions. That sounds good, but it also introduces uncertainty for domestic manufacturers who were counting on that protectionism. If you work in manufacturing or if your business competes with imports, this political collapse is a direct threat to your competitive advantage. The tearing of that document might have just torn up the tariff wall that was keeping your factory open. We need to watch the Senate's next moves closely to see if they attach trade provisions to this new shadow budget. As we peel back the layers, we see that this is not just about one man. It is about the friction between two different types of legitimacy, the populist legitimacy of the rally and the legal rational legitimacy of the institution. The market prefers the latter. It prefers rules, procedures, and boring men in suits who follow the process. That is why the market likely rallied or stayed flat after this incident rather than crashing. Wall Street is betting that the adults are back in charge. But for the voter who felt that the system was rigged and voted for the president to smash it, this is a betrayal. It is the system swallowing the disruptor. And that anger, that sense of betrayal, is going to go somewhere. It is not going to disappear. It is going to curdle into something potentially more destabilizing in the long run. But let's stick to the immediate economic fallout. The timeline that we have obtained suggests that the Senate plans to move quickly. They know they have a window of opportunity while the president is reeling. The next step is the introduction of a clean funding bill, one stripped of all the president's poison pills. Watch for this in the coming days. If they can pass this through both chambers with a veto-proof majority, the transition of power is complete. The president will be in office, but not in power. He will be a figurehead, reigning, but not ruling. For you, this means a strange period of quiet stability and policy, masking a furious political war. It is the eye of the hurricane. The danger is that we get complacent, thinking the storm has passed, when in reality, the structural pressures that created this mess, the inequality, the debt, the polarization, are still building up pressure, waiting for the next weak point in the system to burst. We need to look closely at the specific timeline that has been leaked to us because it reveals the precise mechanics of how this bypass operation is going to be executed. This is not just a list of dates. It is a blueprint for a legislative coup d'etat that utilizes the most obscure and powerful tools in the Senate's procedural arsenal. According to the reports we are seeing, the first phase is already underway. It involves the use of a mechanism known as a concurrent resolution. Typically, budget resolutions are non-binding blueprints, but the Senate leadership is crafting a specialized rule that allows them to deem the budget passed for the purpose of appropriations without the president's signature on the initial framework. This is a technical maneuver, but in plain English, it means they are effectively deleting the president's opening bid from the record. They are proceeding as if the executive branch did not exist for the purposes of fiscal planning. For you, this means that any campaign promise the president made about cutting specific taxes or boosting specific spending programs is effectively dead on arrival. If you were banking on a new child tax credit or a specific subsidy that was promised on the campaign trail, you need to adjust your financial expectations now. That money is not coming because the vehicle that was supposed to deliver it has been dismantled. The second phase of this timeline is even more aggressive, and it directly addresses the fear that the president might try to retaliate by simply refusing to spend the money that Congress appropriates. This is where we get into the weeds of the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. This law was passed specifically to stop President Nixon from doing exactly what the current president is threatening, holding congressionally approved funds hostage. The Senate legal team is reportedly drafting pre-written lawsuits and accelerated court filings that will trigger the moment the administration delays any funding. They are not waiting for him to act. They are pre-positioning the legal artillery. This matters to your local economy because it guarantees that federal dollars will continue to flow to state and local governments, regardless of the president's mood. It is a safeguard for the construction projects, the school funding, and the emergency services in your community. The Senate is effectively building an automated spending machine that the president cannot turn off, ensuring that the gears of capitalism keep turning even if the driver is asleep at the wheel. But the most telling part of this timeline is the reaction of the sharks that the prompt mentions, the opponents who smell blood in the water. In Washington, the sharpest sense of smell belongs to the lobbying industry. We are seeing a massive, quiet migration of capital on K Street. For the last few years, the smart money was spent lobbying the White House, trying to get executive orders or regulatory waivers. Overnight, that money has shifted. The lobbyists know that the power center has moved back to the Senate cloakrooms. They are canceling meetings with White House staffers and booking tables at the restaurants where senators eat. This is the influence market repricing itself in real time. Why does this matter to you? Because when lobbyists shift their focus, policy priorities shift with them. You are going to see a sudden resurgence of corporate-friendly legislation attached to these must-pass budget bills. Things that were stalled because the president was too populist, perhaps deregulation of certain financial instruments or tax loopholes for specific industries, will suddenly find their way into the fine print. The weakened presidency creates a vacuum, and corporate interests are rushing in to fill it. This brings us to the concept of the uncertainty discount that is now being applied to the entire U.S. economy. When you look at your investment portfolio or your retirement savings, you are looking at asset prices that are based on future cash flows. Those cash flows depend on a stable legal and tax environment. When the head of state is publicly neutered and the government is being run by a shadow coalition in the Senate, the risk of an accident goes up. International investors, the people who buy our debt and keep our interest rates lower, are watching this with extreme caution. If they decide that this political dysfunction makes the U.S. a riskier bet, they will demand a higher return on their money. That pushes up yields on Treasury bonds. And since Treasury yields are the benchmark for everything else, that pushes up your mortgage rate, your credit card APR, and the cost of borrowing for your car. You might think you are just watching a politician get embarrassed on TV, but you are actually watching the cost of your future debt liabilities tick upward. The market is pricing in the chaos.